We're in the third week of a series that's designed to help us think about money and basically think about what we think about money and what we do with money. And particularly, we're looking at how being a follower of Jesus changes how we think about money and what we do with it. Okay, so don't disappear on me already. You hear money and you glaze over, or you hear money and you get nervous and sweaty and think she's going to start asking for it. It's not that. Please stay with me in this space. And if you've missed the last 2 weeks, then I really encourage you, I think on the front of your little sheet there, there's the podcast. There's a link to either the podcast or the video YouTube. You can catch up on the last 2 sermons that we've had. Encourage you to do that. And on the back of this sermon notes too, we've printed out again LBC's theology of money. Or actually, it's not LBC's. We think it's a biblical theology of money, but it's something that we've claimed here, and it might be really helpful when you're talking about this in your life groups or in your own thinking to just have a look at some of the tenets of what we say we believe about money and our approach to it. So in the first week, I looked at one of the passages in this theology of money. It was written by Paul to a young pastor called Timothy. And we learnt 3 things, if you recall, those of you that were here. We learnt that, I could have looked them up myself now, I thought I had them in my head. There you go. We put our money where our trust is, and our trust is in God, was the first thing that we learnt. We learnt that we've got to use our money power for good, not evil. And we also learnt that as children of God, we are not to be tight-fisted. And then last week we had Dave Kendall come and speak. He's from an organisation called Christians Against Poverty, and he talked about money and doing what is just and right. That was a really good message. I encourage you to listen to that. Actually, a few people from LBC have gone along and done the CAP, Christian Against Poverty, basic budgeting course, and been trained so that we can teach it here. And I know Josh is making plans to do that, so have a listen out for that. Actually, I read this definition of a budget this week. It said, a budget is a mathematical confirmation of your suspicions. If that's how you feel about budgeting, put your name down for the course when you hear about that. I thought that was quite good. Very true, very true. Okay, so that brings me to today. Today we're going to be thinking about superpowers. Not in terms of nations, America, other parts of the world, not in that sense, but superpowers in terms of extraordinary powers that human beings have. And we're going to read from another letter written by Paul, but this time not to a pastor, to a church, to the early church in Rome. And the place that we're going to pick up the story, where we are there, Paul has done a whole lot of quite heavy theology, but he gets to a place where he's starting to talk about the ethical implications of what he's been saying. So by that I mean he started to talk about how do you take this stuff and turn it into practical right living for every day. So the ethical implications of living as if we are followers of Jesus. Now I want to set the scene for the verses that I really want to focus on by reading you the context around it from Eugene Peterson's paraphrase, The Message. Actually, many of you will have heard that Eugene Peterson died this week. Extraordinary pastor, biblical commentator, follower of Jesus. There'll be a party going on there, I reckon. So here's how Eugene Peterson paraphrases the context for the verses I want to focus on. You can follow if you want in Romans chapter 12. So here's what I want you to do, Paul says, God helping you. Take your everyday, ordinary life, your sleeping, eating, going to work and walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. Embracing what God does for you is the best thing you can do for Him. Don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God. Then you'll be changed from the inside out. Readily recognize what He wants from you and quickly respond to it. Unlike the culture around you, always dragging you down to its level of immaturity, we often see that common denominator becomes the place we go. God brings the best out of you and develops well-formed maturity in you. That's how Eugene Peterson paraphrases those first 2 verses of Romans. And you'll see there that he's actually saying that the way we live in this world as physical beings is the way we worship God. How I live as a physical being in this physical world is the way that I worship God. So think about it like this. When I discipline myself to take a good walk regularly, when you discipline yourself to sweat it out at the gym, because I'm not disciplining myself to do that, just saying, but you guys that do that. When we eat well, when we're careful about what we eat and drink, we are worshipping God because we're being good stewards of the bodies that we have been given. Well, this one, when I feel irritable, which does happen from time to time. Hayden didn't look up too quickly, so that's all right. But I choose not to snap. When I'm honked at and sworn at by another driver and I choose not to rage back, then I am worshipping God with my self-control. Well, when you and I do our very best at our work, or maybe it's our studies, maybe it's with our kids, maybe it's in our other relationships, when we do the best that we can in those places, we are bringing honour to God. It hasn't got a big sign up, it's not 9:30 worship service, but we are worshipping God. We are bringing honour to God because He made us for meaningful work. He made us to be in good relationship with each other. So you see, how we live in this physical world, in these physical bodies, is one of the ways we worship God. And whenever we take action that reflects God's good ways, then we are worshipping Him well. That's actually what Neil's done this morning, hey? He gave testimony to that. He's taken an action that honours God. By being baptised, Neil has done the right thing according to what he's heard the Spirit whispering in his head, according to what Jesus modelled, according to God's good ways. So that was worship to God this morning, Neil. Thank you. Okay, so back to the story, the paraphrase. Paul says, I'm speaking to you out of deep gratitude for all that God has given me, and especially as I have responsibilities in relation to you. Living then, he says, as every one of you does in pure grace, it's important that you not misinterpret yourselves as people who are bringing goodness to God. That's interesting. No, God brings it all to you. The only accurate way to understand ourselves is by what God is and by what God does for us, not by what we are and what we do for Him. Which is a pity, because I do a lot of good things for God. In this way, says Paul, we are like the various parts of a human body. Each part gets its meaning from the body as a whole, not the other way around. I get my meaning from my place in this church family. This church family doesn't get its meaning from me. Same for each of you. Each part gets its meaning from the body as a whole, not the other way around. And the body we're talking about is Christ's body of chosen people. Each of us finds our meaning and function as a part of His body. And he goes on and says, a chopped off finger or a cut off toe, that wouldn't amount to much, would it? So since we find ourselves fashioned into all these excellently formed and marvellously functioning parts in Christ's body, let's just go ahead and be what we were made to be, without enviously or pridefully comparing ourselves with each other or trying to be something we aren't. So Paul has gone to a lot of trouble in setting the scene here. He's gone to a lot of trouble to explain that how we live in this physical world, in these physical bodies, reflects our relationship with God. And that it is incredibly important that every one of us who follows Jesus remembers that any good we have in our lives and anything that is good in who we are is because of God's own generous goodness to us. He's laboured that point. And then he says to the people he was writing to, think real carefully about who you are. Think about how you are naturally wired. How the combination of your parents ended up being you, how you're naturally wired, how you were nurtured, in what sort of gifts and skills you were nurtured in. And think about special skills and gifts that you may have developed or be given along the way as you've gone through life. This is actually quite a serious business for those of us who say we follow Jesus. Figuring out what we're good at means practicing the discipline of honestly evaluating who we are. And we fall into two traps there. Very often we fall into the undervalue. Oh, well, surely everyone's like that, or that's nothing really. So we downplay. The other trap we fall into is, get all grandiose and I'm amazing and I should be doing this and I'm clearly gifted in these ways. Neither of those are right. And often when you're trying to figure out, hey, what is this special gift, the sort of gifts Paul is talking about here, it's often easier or best to try and figure that out in conversation with people that you trust, people that know you well, and people that will be kindly honest with you. So there's a question. Do you know what good gifts you have been given for the blessing of the church family you belong to? All right, we'll come back to that. So far, Paul has said your actions are your worship. They reflect your relationship with God. And then he says to get that worship bit right, we need to know where the goodness comes from. It's not me to God, it's God to me. We need to know what it is we are good at. That's what we've just looked at. And then we need to take our place. That's the whole body business that he's talking about. Worship God by taking the place that is uniquely yours because of the way the goodness of God is shaping and transforming you. There's a place that's uniquely yours because of the way God's goodness is working in you. And now we get to the part where Paul actually lists some of the good gifts that God gives to people who love him and follow Jesus. Now, in this passage, when Paul uses the word gift, he's actually talking very specifically about an ability God has given a person. Now, he makes gift lists like this in many of his writings, Paul. They're quite a common thing. But this one is a little different if you have a little comparison to some of his other lists, because in this one, he really labours the point of the gift in relation to the family. That's the whole talking about the body there. Okay, what was I saying? That's right. I was saying that Paul makes these gift lists in lots of places, okay? But here he really labours the point that the point of these gifts is for the benefit of the church family. That's why he talks about the body in the way that he does here. So we're going to read through the gifts that he lists here, but I want us to remember two things. Firstly, this list is not comprehensive. If you read through it and go, oh, I don't think I'm on that list, there'll be another list with your name on it. In fact, the best thing is to take all the lists that Paul and others make throughout the Bible, and even then, though, you're not going to get a comprehensive list. They're descriptive, they're not prescriptive. But let's have a listen to what Paul lists in this place. So Romans 12, verses 6 to 8. In his grace, God has given us different gifts for doing certain things well. So if God has given you the ability to prophesy, then speak out with as much faith as God has given you. If your gift is serving others, serve them well. If you are a teacher, teach well. If your gift is to encourage others, be encouraging. If it is giving, give generously. If God has given you leadership ability, take that responsibility seriously. And if you have a gift for showing kindness to others, do that kindly, gladly. So Paul says, in his grace, God has given us some different gifts for doing certain things well. Some of us are good at prophecy. And prophecy really is simply being able to put a spotlight on truth. Sometimes that truth spotlight might be shining on something that will happen in the future. But oftentimes, and I think I see that quite a bit in the context of this church family, that prophecy, that truth spotlight shines the light on something that is going on in our lives right now. That's prophecy as well. So think about that. Have you ever had anyone shine a light on truth in this way in your life? Actually, is that gift the good gift that God has given you for the benefit of this church family? What about serving? Now that's an interesting one, because as followers of Jesus, we are all called to serve. It's not, okay, good, I don't have to do any serving, that belongs to that gifted person over there. But the serving that Paul is talking about in this passage is quite specific. He's probably referring to a particular serving gift of helping the church to organise and provide for the needs of the church family. So in some church structures, we call that role deacons. So, deacons might be responsible for pastoral care or facility maintenance or for hospitality. And so their role is to make sure that teams are organised to meet the care needs of people and, make sure people are welcomed and that the building is pleasant and comfortable and safe and sound. We don't have that formal title, deacons, here in this church, but I'm sure that even as I was describing that, you can see that we have people and teams that serve in that particular way, in that role. I mean, think about it. Have you been served by someone already this morning? Yeah. Have you been a servant in that sense that we've talked about for someone this morning? Now, this question, is this sort of serving the particular good gift that God has given you for the building up of this part of his church? Then there's teaching, which is simply passing on the truth of the good news about Jesus, who is God come to be with us and for us, so that we can be back in the right relationship with our Creator God that we were made for. Who teaches you in this church family? Is teaching a gift God has given you to build up this family? Or maybe your good God gift given for the benefit of this church family is encouragement. Now, in this particular context, that word encouragement probably means the gift of being able to encourage people around you who already follow Jesus to do that better. So it's the person in your life group or your friendship group or your ministry team who always seems to be the one to have the kind and comforting but challenging word to say to you when you're sharing a story about what is going on in life or challenges that you face. Often these people are mentors, so people that you think of as mentors in your life, or coaches, sometimes formally, but oftentimes informally. So it's a very specific sort of encouragement. It's the sort of encouragement that helps someone who follows Jesus live more and more like Jesus would want you to live. Now, I hope, and I'm sure that as you sat there, those of you who call this place home, some names of some people came to your mind. I've got a long list in my head of people in this church family who I think are encouragers in this way. Can you see that gift in someone? That mentoring, coaching to do better in our lives as followers of Jesus. I want to ask you two things. Maybe if you see that gift in someone, you could take some time today or this week to encourage them in their gift of encouraging. Just to say, I see that in you. I see that you mentor, that you coached. And the other thing is, answer this question for yourself. Is this gift your good gift given for the benefit of this congregation? And are you using it? Okay, there are more gifts in this Paul's list here. He talks about the gift of leadership, being able to guide and direct people wisely. That's an important definition. And there is kindness or mercy, the gift of being sensitive to the needs of others. Again, names will have come to your head, I'm sure. People in this place that are gifted, sensitive to the needs of others. More than that, then willing to go into that place with them and sit with people in their often distress. So who do you know in this church with those gifts? And again, is leadership, being able to guide and direct wisely, or kindness, the special gift that God has given you to use in this place? These are important questions that only you can answer for yourself. Now, if you've been tracking, you'll notice that I skipped over one. It's in verse 8. Paul says, if your gift is giving, give. Now, giving, when I was looking at this, it's a bit like serving, don't you think? If we follow Jesus, we're all expected to do it. Again, it's not I'm not gifted with giving, I can leave that to other people to worry about. But I guess what Paul is talking about here is that the fact that some are especially gifted to serve the church by giving. And there is something quite extraordinary about generous giving. There's a guy called Alex Cook who's a Christian and a financial expert, and he writes this. He says, generosity moves people. If there were a few things that could change our broken world, he writes, then generosity would surely be one of them. And he goes on to say, which I find this quite interesting, he thinks that for revival to come to Western nations, they're quite different to the rest of the world, but to Western nations, one of the pillars that needs to be in place is extraordinary generosity. Okay, so how do you recognise the gift of generosity in your own life or in the life of someone else? Well, like all the other gifts I've mentioned, the first thing you'll notice is that a person is wanting to be and is actually growing to be more and more like Jesus. That works for all those gifts. But here's some things that are perhaps unique to the gift of giving. You'll know that you or someone you observe has the gift of giving when they want to grow more and more like Jesus, and you see them changing in that way. But also when you see that they give extravagantly to others. Now, I have used that word deliberately, and I know it will offend and upset some and cause, I hope, most of us to think, because extravagant doesn't sound like very good stewardship, does it? Extravagantly, extraordinarily. And I'm using that word deliberately because what is God's love for us if not extravagant? You'll recognise the gift of generosity in someone's life or in your own life when you see something else as well. When you see regular generous giving. Regular generous giving, not the occasional spike in a graph. Regular generous giving. I mean, the spikes in the graph are great, and when God puts it on people's hearts, we take the spikes, but I'm talking about the gift of giving here. You'll see regular generous giving. And you'll recognise the gift of generosity in yourself or others when you see that it actually always costs something. So sacrificial in some way. Obviously, sometimes it'll be the sacrifice of the money given. Maybe the sacrifice will be that there's some comfort or time or ease or some plans that people have to put aside. For some people, the cost is the awkwardness of being recognised as a person with the gift of giving. I don't know why that works in our culture, but we feel a lot more uncomfortable with that than with many of the other gifts. But if you think about it, if God has given you the good gift of giving for the benefit of the church family, there's no more awkwardness in being recognised for that gift than there is in being recognised for the gift of serving or encouraging or kindness or leadership. So, a life that more and more reflects God's good ways shown to us in Jesus. Extravagant giving, I'm going to stick with that word, you can debate it with me. Regular generous giving. Sacrificial giving. They are 4 ways that you will be able to recognise the gift, that extraordinary gift of giving in someone. Here's one way you will not be able to recognise the gift of giving, and that is by if we all laid out our bank balances. You won't recognise the gift of giving by a person's bank balance. You know, I see people in this church family that I know are on very modest incomes, giving generously and sacrificially again and again. And when I see those people, I see people living more and more like Jesus, who they love and who they follow. I see people worshipping God with their actions and the decisions they make. But I also know people in this church family who are wealthy by any measure. But they don't assume status or power or worth because of their wealth. Instead, they too give generously and sacrificially and again and again. And with their actions, they too are living each day more like Jesus and worshipping God with their lives. I would love to be able to tell you some of those stories, but they're not my stories to tell. Don't panic. They're not my stories to tell. So I will just say, some of you here today have the gift of giving and it's got nothing to do with your bank balance. I know who some of you are. I hope you know who you are. And I know that there are people in this place who know who you are because it's your generous giving that has eased burden in their life. And I actually just want to say thank you. Thank you. Is generous giving the good gift given to you for the benefit of the congregation and community, the local church you belong to? I said that today we were going to talk about superpowers. Good gifts that God gives us as part of the way He changes us. So the gift He's given is the point of that is in part to transform us, to change us. He's given us good gifts as one of the ways we worship Him. And as Paul was at great pains to tell that church in Rome all those years ago, God gives good gifts as a way to build up and bless and strengthen and transform the local church community. We don't need to be awkward or ashamed about that. It'd be bad if we kept it all here. But that's part of what God calls us to do. Part of the reason that He gives us is to bless the body. So I've got a list of questions for you as we end today. The first one is, what is your superpower? If you follow Jesus, what is the good gift that God has given to you? Do you know? Do you need to have a conversation with some people you trust? The second question's easier. Where is your church home? Alexis is between church homes. That question, where is your church home? And then this one, okay, so what is your gift? What is your superpower? Where is your church home? Are you using that gift there? Are you using the gift where you belong? Once again, let me say, if you are, then thank you. On behalf of the gathered body in this place or wherever it is that you may worship, thank you. Thank you for being people who know what your gift is and for using it in your church family. And then if you are not sure, then I want to suggest this. Why not start the conversation this week? Over lunch, in your life group, over coffee, with your ministry teams, with your family. If you're not sure what your gift is, or if you think you know but you're not sure how to use it, start that conversation. It matters that those things line up in a place that you call your church home. That conversation could be your act of worship this week. I encourage you to it.